Welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Rising podcast, journeys of descending into the mysteries and rising from the roots. I am your host, Lisa Hillier, spiritual mentor and priestess. I have guided hundreds of women into the mysteries within them through my one-to-one mentorship, online courses, and Patreon portal. Today I have Ginger Kern on the show with me. Ginger is a writer and guide for women on the path of the devotional feminine, rooted in sovereignty and surrendering all in the ways of sacred union. She supports women in embodying the mature feminine, dissolving victim triangle dynamics and restoring right relationship to the masculine. Her work centers on reclaiming the potency of the womb-heart connection within the female body, and helping women remember the rightful oracular nature of the womb. Can't wait to sink into this episode with you. Okay, welcome, Ginger. And to start, we're going to start with the question of what has been the latest journey, the latest thread that has brought you to the work that you're offering the world today?
Such a big question. And thank you, first of all, for having me. The latest thread. There's been a lot moving in my world, which I consider my world to be sort of co-woven. It's not coming just from me. And I know you sit in similar circles. So one of the larger threads that is alive and bringing me into more of my writing and more of my creative space, that pulse, has been around the devotional feminine, which of course is a very different texture from the divine feminine. And yet they're interrelated, but perhaps not in the way that most people might think or feel. And that devotional femininity and the way that it shows up in my life and in the way that I, and now more so than ever before, the women around me are feeling themselves relating to men from a lens that just is perhaps not so societally celebrated. As I think perhaps we might actually benefit from celebrating it. So it's a little bit of a cryptic start, but I have a feeling we'll tease apart those threads as we go throughout today.
I feel like there are a few little invitations.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Let's start with devotional feminine and divine feminine, and who is the devotional feminine and how she differs from the divine feminine that's kind of all over Instagram these days.
These days, yeah, right. So the way, and this maybe answers like a little bit of the backstory question that you originally brought to me before we started recording. But originally, where I felt most drawn to this work in the realms of the mysteries and the feminine and the deep feminine was originally through like goddess archetypes. And that was actually something that for me actually surfaced as young as 5 or 6. Like literally one of the first books that my father ever gave me was a book of Greek myths and Norse myths. So mythology has always been a very sort of foundational part of my upbringing in life. And of course, when it became sort of vogue to have some sort of personal connection to the goddess or the goddesses, the facets of the divine feminine, at first I felt quite relieved because I was like, oh my gosh, finally, like people are starting to pay attention to the goddess and exalting, these different aspects of the feminine, which I feel are so important in terms of women embodying the fullness of who they are, myself included, obviously. And yet, something that I started to notice over and over again was this thread throughout the sort of divine feminine, let's say marketed version, is actually that it's quite self-sourced and it's very self-centric in a way that often also doesn't include the masculine. It sort of exalts and pedestalizes the feminine and at the expense of the God aspect, So that I think is a distinct split when we consider that energetic of sort of exalting the feminine at the expense of the masculine, or let's say denigrating the patriarchy in favor of the matriarchy, this sort of like either or split. It's a very different energetic, I found, than a community and frankly, like my own inner journey that I've managed to somehow stumble into over the past couple of years, which I would use that term devotional feminine to describe. Devotional feminine is a deep pulse of pouring and giving, and not from a place of self-sacrifice, although paradoxically it also involves like utter self-obliteration at the same time. So we'll go into, I think, what I mean more by that, I'm sure, as we talk here today, but just really restoring that right relationship of the feminine with the masculine, not as, again, this sort of like flip-flop of, well, we had power over women, so now we have to have power over men in order to sort of right the balance. It's like, no. Okay, let's just pause all that for a moment. And, we can talk about the layers of that as well. The pendulums, the necessary pendulum swing that's, I think, happening. But to come back into harmony, I feel, is the most important thing that we can possibly be focused on as women. And that's not just inner harmony, that's harmony with the masculine. And that threads into union, that threads into sacred union, that threads into creation, co-creation, that sort of generative infinity loop that naturally establishes itself when we're in right relationship with the masculine, and actually sourcing between the two. That's something I'm really, excited to dive into more with you today. I'm already getting very warm. There's always like life force that sort of flushes me, when I talk about this sort of thing. So for whatever that's worth, I'm happy to be here and talk more. Yeah.
You're feeling the washes. It felt like Eros when you were talking, like just that life force energy moving through you.
Completely. Yeah. And it's not self-sourced. It's not me. That's the thing. It's like, I feel, and to go back to your original question, the difference between divine feminine as the movement, or sort of what's marketed, versus devotional feminine. The divine feminine is really about sort of like me, like, look at me, I'm radiant, I'm wild, I'm feral in this beautiful, potent way. And it's a different texture to actually have it not be about who you are. It's actually not about you. It is certainly about what you bring through, like the flow of the life force and the pulse of Eros that moves through you and naturally out into the world. And it's just this river, like that in and of itself, of course. Oh my gosh, like, yes, please, more aliveness, more life force. But the life force couldn't care less who you are. It just uses you. And that's a very different thing. So
you're just the channel of it, like moving through.
Essentially, yeah.
The
Ideally
vessel.
a clear channel. Ideally, exactly. Yeah. I mean, to use your word, a vessel or grail, to sort of drop that one in the space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. The grail, the holy grail, the chalice that the life force is flowing through and overflowing and abundant, and that devotional piece. So just to get really simple with it, would it be like devotion to God as, the masculine face of God? Is it devotion to goddess? Is it devotion to both? Is it, what does that look like for you?
For me, thank you for asking. So I feel like, what does that look like in general? It's like, oh my goodness, I won't have an answer for everyone, will I? But for me, it is devotion to soul essence. And obviously, where does that come from? It doesn't come from me. It's not like I'm like, I have a soul and I am a soul and it's all about me. Again, that sort of self-centric focus, it just doesn't cut it. It doesn't. It's something that, to make it very simple, like before I started sitting down with you just here, I went outside. It had just started raining. I just slowed myself down. I dropped into my womb. And I just asked, like, please get me out of the way. Just get me out of the way. I don't want to even be in, like, me, the personality me. I don't want to be on this podcast. It's not for me to be here. Like, please clear me out of the way so that whatever I can say can be clean. That's what it's about. It's in devotion to that.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I felt chills when you were speaking that. It's very powerful.
Thank you.
So with that right relationship with the masculine, I love that it's not, you spoke to the patriarchy and the matriarchy, and we've kind of had this power over, so to speak, and the way forward isn't the opposite, where it's power over, reversed with the women over the men. And we can see that happening in a lot of narratives and programming and that kind of stuff. And so what it felt like was more the complementing aspects of the masculine and the feminine coming back into co-creation. So what does that right relationship look for you in the
Okay, so here's where I feel like I can speak beyond just for me, which is maybe a little bit different than what you're intending.
oh, that's perfect.
Wonderful. Yeah, right relationship. I mean, it's a harmonic, first of all. You feel it. It clangs in this very clear, pure vibration. It's almost as if you hit a tuning fork and it has this very clear ping into the entire space, and you can feel it vibrating in your bones. Like anyone who's listening, like, when you're in the presence of, let's say, a couple who has a harmonic, you feel it. It's that life force that's flowing between the two of them, unhindered, unimpeded. That's right relationship. Everyone can feel it. People notice it from afar. They will light up around it in your presence. There's nothing that you can't fake it, is what I'm trying to say. And so right relationship in and of itself is not, I really feel this is really important to say, it's not a strategy. You're not aiming at right relationship in order to get something. You are simply attuning yourself and watching your own behavior, essentially, to further crystallize and purify whatever is you, so that it can just be in right relationship. And that is something that is an internal process. Of course, it comes out through mirroring of that man, let's say, that you're with, certainly. And I fully believe, I'm sure we can talk about this too, I fully believe that we learn and we grow most in relationship versus in solo practice. I feel it's a space in which we can't hide from ourselves, or at least we can hide a lot less. It's easier to hide when you're on your own with yourself. So that's at least from my personal experience. Yeah.
I would 100% agree with that. It's like you can do all this work on your own. And I did that for many years. And then I get into relationship and like all the shadows, everything comes up, everything I thought I had healed, quote unquote healed. No, right there for me to tend to in this relational dynamic.
100%.
The perfect mirror. Yeah, the perfect mirror.
Right. And again, if we go back to the sort of foundation, that it's just that you're sort of purifying your channel, as it were, as a woman, like as you, the chalice, the vessel. It's like, what a perfect opportunity to have everything come up. I mean, I'm in this daily with God or with my man. Like there's stuff that comes up daily. I'm a highly emotional being. I'm very, very, I'm just feeling it all, and I'm super rational as well, but at my core, like what I actually experience sensation wise in my body is a pretty wide range, and it's kind of happening all the time, and it's not really something that I would ever want to stop or change. It's just a matter of like, all right, so what is this information that's flowing through me? How can I best possibly, for instance, like mirror it out to my man, or like give it up through my heart to God, or sit with it and like let it alchemize through my body and burn some shit away. So there's just different pathways depending on what the energy is wanting to do.
Yeah. So with that, right relationship with a man and a woman, that harmonic that you spoke so beautifully to, I'm going to ask you like the how. How, how does a woman get to that place, and how does a man get to that place? Does that make sense?
It does. No, definitely. And I feel actually I need to bring in a woman that both of us know, mentor, sister, teacher of both of ours. Her name is Christina Louise, and she articulates this so beautifully. So I actually will draw a little bit from her work, which of course is just the work in general. But I feel the way that she speaks about how is really beautiful and has been really true in my own life and experience. One of the hows for women is, first of all, to stop worrying about the how for men. No matter what it is that he is doing or not doing, it's not your business. It's not your business. You can bring that to God. You can sit with it yourself, but it's not up to you. And you have no business trying to influence or get an outcome or have an agenda there. So that's definitely number one, is like, first of all, whatever he's doing, that's not your concern. That's not to say that you don't have choice, obviously, or agency in who you choose to relate with. Of course, you definitely do. We're sovereign beings, right? So if we look at ourselves, then knowing that that's really all we have access to, and, clean ability to change. Right relationship, from what I've seen, it involves a couple of layers. One layer certainly being at the mind, and that's often the layer that people start at because it's the societally acceptable one, and mindset training and integrity coaching and sort of all of these linear structures to bring oneself into more and more integrity. Not in the sense of morality, but in the sense of like, let me make sure my life works, sort of mindset coaching, that sort of thing. That's definitely a pathway in. And it's helpful. It is helpful for the feminine to have structure, as we know, right? We actually do crave being contained in certain ways. But at the level of what fundamentally makes us women, we have our wombs. And if we do not pay attention to our wombs, if we're cut off from our wombs, whether through trauma, hormonal birth control, etc., then it's going to be a lot harder to be in right relationship with ourselves first. And then, of course, with the masculine as an extension of that. So if we're actually going to pare everything else away, set the mindset aside, set all of the tips and tricks and strategies and, frankly, not so well disguised control mechanisms of getting what we think we want, we set all of those aside for a moment, and pay really, really close attention to our bodies and the sensations that our bodies are allowing to move through. And if we further drop down into what Christina would call our feminine core, which is the womb-heart connection, that is like a very, very, very potent channel that is blocked in most women on the planet today for no fault of their own or some fault of their own. I won't say really fault. I think responsibility is a better word. So for instance, I can tell right now, if I just tune into my body, I have a little bit of tightness around my upper abdomen. For sure, that's just my identity at play right here. Like, that's not, it's just something that wants to express itself and make itself known in my body. But I actually can feel underneath that the magnetic bowl of my pelvic floor and my womb that's supporting my entire central channel. And that is connected with my heart. I can actually feel it in my body. I think that specifically, if women can, speaking to the how, can slow down enough, even if it's just for a minute, one day out of a crazy year and whatever's been happening in life, to feel that connection between the heart and the womb, that anchor point somatically becomes this homing beacon where if you're not coming from that place. Like, I'm at the point now where I know if I'm coming from my mind versus if I'm actually dropped into my feminine core and sourcing from the divine through that place. It's an entirely different sensation to move through the world from and speak from. And so in terms of how to restore right relationship with the masculine, it's like, you have to start in your own body. You have to. There's no way around it. You can't think yourself into it. So I'll pause there. I know that was already a lot.
No, and it's so true. You can't think your way into it. You will drive yourself, well, in my experience, you will drive yourself crazy trying to think your way into it. And when you start to drop into your body, into your womb, there's such a peace there. Like, and my whole body just softened, even just saying that. Like, it just, like, such a sinking in that you don't experience when you're in your mind.
Right. Because how could you?
Yeah.
Mind takes us out. It takes us out. And that doesn't mean that we neglect the mind or we shut it off entirely, like not at all. It's just that it needs to be, speaking of right relationship, it just needs to be brought into the right hierarchy. Like it's not, the mind is the servant of the oracular powers of the womb. The mind is the servant of the heart. And it is a force of discernment, certainly, because we can all pattern map, we can look back on life experiences and reflect, but where you will get the sort of inexplicable and entirely not to be debated sensations is in your body. Like your body will tell you what is and isn't right for you. It will tell you where you are supposed to go. It will tell you if you are in the presence of something that's making you remember what is true for you from even past lives. Like that all comes through the body. That doesn't come from the mind, and it never will. So it's I know for the listeners of your podcast, I've listened to many episodes now, you deal with the mystery. That's why we're here. We're not listening, we're talking, we're not listening to this podcast because we're excited about all of the tips and tricks and strategies to touch the mystery. That's not why we're here. We're here for the direct experiential gnosis of the mystery, of the void, of the divine. That's an entirely different category. And it's just frankly a bit harder to explain to people because you have to explain usually through language, which is what we're doing right now. So we're inherently limited by this format of a podcast because we're using language versus you and I in person together, hugging womb to womb, we would be transmitting without words.
Yeah. Language limits us in so many ways where it's like, just like you said, if we were in physical space together, our bodies are speaking in so many ways that goes way beyond what our mind can fathom.
So far beyond. Yeah. And that's exciting to me. Like that's the piece where I do hope that language can be a bridge into this work. It's definitely a bridge. It's definitely full of little beacons and anchor points that sort of, ping in people's systems. And of course, my voice, your voice carry harmonics and frequencies, literally, right? So in that and of itself, people can feel us for sure. It's just a little bit more limited. And I think we have to take that into account when we're having a conversation like this, so.
Yeah. And I think people receive in between the words is maybe the way that I'll say it. There's vibrations and all that kind of thing in between the words that their minds might not be processing, but there's something that's felt beneath the words for sure. So in your own journey, what is that, I'll use the word, one of Christina's word, that dissension into the womb? How have you descended into the womb? What are some practices that you've brought in?
Okay, so very, very simply, many years ago now, I got off hormonal birth control. That was a very short part, but an important part of my journey. And I healed my gut microbiome, which was all sorts of inflamed and disrupted and completely disrupting my womb heart connection because it was carrying so much inflammation and pain. I had experiences with, pelvic pain as well from that whole part of my journey. Really looking at, again, gut microbiome. I can't stress that enough. It's something where I had a lot of really frustrating experiences with Western doctors. They weren't able to find out what was quote unquote wrong with me, meaning what was out of balance. Why was it out of balance? Of course, no one was looking at the pill as a contributing factor to inflammation. So I share all of that because they seem like, disparately, they seem like such small things like, oh, like gluten, it kind of like inflames my system, or, oh, I've just been on the pill for 5 years. Like, it's not a big deal. I just use it because whatever, insert the reason there. Or, my mom happens to be an alcoholic, or my dad happens to be XYZ. Like, I'm just making up examples now, but the point is all of it is a constellation that impacts the clarity of your own physical somatic system. So like physiologically and digestively, for instance, all of that plays a part into okay, can I feel my womb or not? So we can't skip over those parts of the journey. And I actually am really heartened by just how many women who are drawn to this sort of deep work, or I mean, really, it's a path. Like it's sorry, if you're here, if you're listening, you're on the path. Like you wouldn't be here otherwise. So welcome. You're not going to get off of it. That's the fun part. You're here. So welcome to the team. And yeah, like the point is it's just a refinement process over the years. So for me, like, I guess in more recent years, when I like reflect, because my body has been in a much clearer place, from like the physical, the very 3D level, it's honestly been more of about how can I be with and hold more and more sensation and allow more sensation to run through my body without collapsing or dissociating, and popping out of my humanity experience. So that's actually been like a huge learning journey for me. I think it is for probably all of us who are approaching this path, and to sort of dovetail into some of the things I think we can probably talk a bit more about, to really drop into like clarity and sensation, even when it's really, really big and feels scary and overwhelming. There has to be this element or this moment of surrender into it, knowing that you don't know what's on the other side, but you're just going to let it take you, and your hands are fully off the wheel and something else is holding you. It's that journey. It's that particular moment that if women haven't gotten to that point quite yet, I can guarantee you that they are still grasping for control in some way, shape, or form. There's still an agenda. If they've gotten over and through, let's say it's really through that moment of, okay, my hands are actually off the wheel, there's a large sensation arising in my body for whatever reason, I'm just going to trust that I can run it through me and something's going to have me through this process and I will come out the other side. It's an entirely different conversation, because the practices on the other side of that letting go of control and actual, true, physical, felt surrender, they're very different practices, because you already have the somatic anchor point in your system of what like literal utter obliteration feels like, and you've somehow survived it. And the somehow is the part where you can't explain it. You have to experience it. Or like, what's the driving force behind that? What has you? I don't know. That's what I would call God personally. It's like whatever is the thing that's like holding all of us all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That obliteration. Can you elaborate on that word of obliteration? Like that just feels like completely devoured. That's what it feels like to me, or like cracked open and just like,
Yes.
I don't know, could be like a shattered heart, even like obliterated.
Yeah. Also that totally. It can feel like literally all three of the textures that you just named. I mean, obliteration is just one word that I have felt, just like I'm like not even here anymore, but there's some sense of I retain this connection to whatever my essence is, and it feels actually even more clear. But everything else has been completely effaced. Or I love the word, like actually I got really excited when you said the word devoured. I think that's because I'm like very like just like the woman, like we want to just be eaten up, like please come devour us, like please eat us up, like that feels really, really yummy actually. But to your point about a shattered heart, obliteration in my experience is also like incredibly, incredibly painful. I mean, it's painful until the point of letting go. And then it still can be painful, but it feels different. It's more like just large sensation, which can be ecstatic. So now we're really talking about like mysticism, actually, like ecstatic grief, ecstatic pain, right? Yeah. It's like that pain pleasure axis, right? Where it's like, are they different? Are they though? We're not really sure. No one's really sure. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But when we talk about obliteration, or when I feel into just utter like God force obliteration, like that's actually quite pleasurable for me, because I feel in my truest nature, I feel most like myself when it's not me running the show.
Yeah. It's like the true essence of you, the soul essence of you running the show, or
whatever
God,
is.
who knows?
Who knows? Right. That's the fun part. Like, I don't know. I don't pretend to know. It's just, you can feel the texture. And I'm sure a lot of people listening, you felt that at one time or another, where you're just like, wow, I don't even know what I just said, but clearly it helped that person. And I literally have no idea what I just said. It's like, cool,
Yeah.
perfect example. You were out of the way and the thing came through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or whatever it was, the impulse to, I don't know, like literally one time, this is such a funny story to tell, but one time I stopped a fight from breaking out in a dance club just by noticing that these two men were starting to shove each other pretty violently. And, I was in like club attire, so like, short skirt, nice stuff, right? I just like slipped over there and I just put my hand on one of the guy's hearts. I looked up into his eyes and I just asked him, "Are you okay?" And then the fight like stopped, like literally nothing happened. He was just like so bewildered, so thrown. But it's not like I was planning to do that. I didn't have like a strategy. It just, my body moved, like it just moved me there, and it put my hand on his heart. And that's what happened. It's like, I wasn't thinking about what to do there. So I guess at some level, we might be talking about the level of instinct, but I do think it's more than that. At least I feel it's more than that. Yeah.
Yeah. It felt like that instinct, but led by God. Maybe
That would
a
be
little.
wonderful. I would like to think so. Hard to sort of analyze it, retrospectively, but that's what it feels like. It's like, I don't know what's moving me. I really have no clue, but it seems to do good things. So I trust it. And then I just keep doing that. And that's it. Yeah.
That when you were speaking to grief, that kind of came in with the obliteration and the shattering of the heart and devouring that beautiful tapestry of words that were running there. And with that grief, I think there is that moment when we've just like opened our heart in the depths of grief and surrender and tears, where we get to like this bliss. And it's like underneath it all, there's that texture to it as well. Like there's pleasure at the bottom of that pain, or maybe even in that pain. But it's like when we open ourselves to the depths of grief and pain, there's bliss and beauty and like that pure essence in that.
Totally. And it's so hard to describe or it's hard to make someone believe that who hasn't experienced it. But I know, just the way by how you're talking about it, I know you've experienced it. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to talk about it that way.
Yeah. Because it's incredibly comfortable, incredibly uncomfortable to sit in that, to get to that point. And I think what that speaks beautifully to is, in my own experience, normally I would disassociate. I'd run, I'd numb, I'd drink, whatever it looked like. But in this last iteration of the deepest grief I've ever experienced, where I met that bliss, there wasn't the option of any of that. I had to go in. And I think I was ready to go in.
Right. So I think that's an important piece. It's just to name that. I feel maybe in this space in general, there's this this hierarchy of like better, more, better, more healed, get better, fix yourself, la la la. But the point is, like, you are on the journey of your soul and nobody else's soul, and you were ready in the moment that you were ready, and then it was perfect, and you were able to enter into that void that you had never had the readiness to enter before. And that's exactly perfect. That's like literally divinely perfect. So, but you knew that you were meeting your edge in that, and you knew that you had this like combination, correct me if I'm wrong, but of sort of the courage fear edge that was in just the right proportion. You're like, okay, here I am, take me.
Yeah, that courage and fear speaks really loud, because a lot of people on the outside would have been like, she should be out of this by now. She should be doing this. She should be healed. All the shoulds, where it was like, no, God is taking me somewhere that I need to access. And that takes a lot of courage to go into those spaces. But it's like, God will only bring you to them when you're fully ready.
And that's beautiful. That's like if we're kind of going to use some more like human words, that's the consensual part of it. Actually, it's entirely consent based. You'll never be forced into a place of being in obliteration. Like you're the one that chooses it for sure. So in that, there's also comfort because it's not going to happen before you're ready,
Yeah. With that being devoured by the masculine, is that where you're like, ooh, it feels so good to be devoured and every woman wants that? Is that fair to say? Like that devour?
I would say, here's what I would say. This is where we get to start having a little bit of fun. I would say every woman who is in touch with yearning, definitely on some level yearns and longs to be devoured. Or to be filled is another word, but I feel like you can sort of connect those sensations of like being utterly devoured and obliterated and being filled to the point that you're just like bursting and then you kind of explode into nothingness anyway. It's kind of the same outcome. It's just like, yeah, it's fun to explore the different ways of feeling that and getting there. Not that that's the goal, obviously. But that yearning, I think, is the really deep-seated piece, like longing and yearning for the feminine. I feel like we really just have to make peace with the fact that we'll always be longing for more. We'll always be yearning to be devoured or to be filled. Like it doesn't go away. And it would be actually not in right relationship with our nature to try and make that feeling go away. Like it's literally what we're built as, a void. Like physiologically, that's what sets us apart. We have a void in us, like that men don't have. And it's, if we're talking just purely biologically, it's meant to be filled in that way, right? Not saying like it has to be. But in terms of like survival of the species and all that good stuff. But yeah, the yearning itself, energetically, let's go back to like energetics, because I think that's kind of more so where we'll play today. The sensation of, if someone's solo, like if you're not in practice with a man, let's say, if you're just with yourself and with God, the sensation of yearning can be the same as what we were talking about with grief. It can be both ecstatic and incredibly painful. I speak from personal experience. Like this is not a theoretical thing. This is like, I am on my knees crying. My mascara is full on like black on my face, like everywhere. Like, gut wrenching sobs. Like that's the level of like pain that yearning can feel like in the body. And that's also not a bad thing. It's not something to try to avoid. I really, really, truly believe that. And then of course there can be like the yearning and the desirous, it's almost like want to be devoured and want to devour at the same time, where we have that with a lover, we have that with our man. And it's like a generative yearning. It's like, oh my gosh, please let me offer myself to you and be consumed by you and have our fullness generate something that is so much bigger than the sum of our parts. And that's a very different texture of yearning versus like the yearning that is, and both are valid. Like it's still just yearning at the core of it. Yeah, I'm gonna stop talking. It's already a lot too. I like get on these tangents where I can just go and go and go. So I'm gonna, rein it in.
I think with that, like devouring and being devoured by the masculine and penetrated by the masculine, in my experience, there were a lot of walls built up against that. And then those grieving processes, or however it wants to show up, allowed those walls to crumble down, where I could touch that true desire of yearning that might have looked like, maybe it was anger. I don't know. I'm really just like processing this in the moment, like as we're speaking, but it's like it showed up in so many different ways, like anger, frustration, irritation, like, kind of pushing the masculine away. And then when those walls started to come down, it was like I could touch that true desire of yearning to be like consumed by the masculine.
And what did that feel like for you?
Yeah. What did that well, I'm just getting sensations throughout my whole body, but it feels like obliterated. Like, like that, like shattered, open and surrender. And then my survival, comes in where it's like, this isn't safe. We can't be this open. We can't be this vulnerable. And so I'm working through those layers at this time. But it's like that, yeah, just obliteration and openness and receptivity.
And just holding the openness with the gentleness, like holding that, whoa, this is really high sensation. My system is super, super open. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm feeling a lot. I'm feeling a lot. I'm feeling a lot. The breath of that. And just like actually stewing in that versus, what you were saying. Of course, both of us have done this. I'm sure a lot of people listening have done this, like versus like, oh God, all right, collapse. I got to self-protect, right? It's like, oh, wait a second. We can actually inhale to actually hold that large amount, like really, really, really immense amount of sensation in our bodies. And what a gift too, like what a gift for, the people around me or you or anyone, where especially like to the men, oh my God, they live off of that. It's so nourishing to their systems to experience a woman in her fullness, in her, like in the full embodiment of whatever the sensation is arising, when she's actually holding it in herself. And that could be rage, that could be pain, that could be sweetness or desire, any number of things. I can like feel it in my belly as truth. Like it's really nourishing for them to feel that, because they don't have the same access points into that wide of a range of sensation as we do. They just don't. It's just, again, there's just a difference there. But they gain access to it through us. And that's one of our gifts to them. And it's a huge gift, actually. It also is a huge mirror for them too. And I think, you and I, prior to kind of hopping on here, we talked a little bit just on email about, devotional yearning versus codependent yearning. And what does it mean? Like the mature feminine, how do we embody the mature feminine? It's like, well, that's one of the characteristics, one of the telltale signs is, can a woman hold that level of immense sensation and not spill it or dump it or off gas it onto the man in front of her, for instance? Like, can she just hold it and express it out into the space around them, but not actually like put it onto him specifically?
Yeah, that's powerful. And what it felt like, when we go through these depths of grief or pain or whatever it is, when we actually feel what we're feeling, we do something, the right terminology is not coming up, but for our nervous system, where we can hold more and hold more and hold more, we regulate our nervous system to be able to hold that level of sensation, where we don't run or bolt or dump over our holy grail.
Yes, kick over the chalice.
Kick over the chalice and run for dear life.
Oh,
yeah, that's so beautiful. So with that mature feminine, what does she look like, the mature feminine?
Oh, sorry, there was a little sweet part of me was like, well, it's never really possible because no one's ever perfect. And I just want to say that first. So yeah, I feel like there's always the tendency, and I mean, this is, absolutely present in my system, in my upbringing, all of it. There's this tendency where we like see an ideal and we're like, aha, well, I have to be that, and I've got to do it right. And I've got to be perfect at it. Like, please, I'm absolutely from that sort of upbringing as well. Got it. I have to do it perfectly. That's not what we're going for here. So let me just say that first. Mostly talking to my younger self, and I'm sure listeners can relate. The mature feminine, I mean, my goodness. So basis and sovereignty, not looping through victim triangle dynamics where, she's the victim or the persecutor or the rescuer. So we're not doing that. We're just rooted in our wombs, in our hearts and wombs, the connection there. And we're moving from our essences primarily. Again, not perfectly, not 100% of the time. Is it useful, again, to use our minds and like move from our minds sometimes or whatnot? Like, sure. But again, if we're going to define it by what it's not, mature feminine is not collapsing all the time or using her emotions as weapons or, emasculating men because of her own fear and control mechanisms. Like, that is definitely what she is not. She's certainly not a victim. She's not a victim. And she never will be either. And she also never has been, actually. And that's a tricky one for some people. She never actually has been a victim, even if it's felt like it. Yeah, I'll pause there. There might be more I want to say on that, but I'm going to pause.
Okay. It feels like, and I want to emphasize that too, when I was speaking to being able to hold, like the nervous system, being able to hold more and, not dump the chalice onto him. I still dump the chalice onto him sometimes. There's no, I don't think we're ever fully there, if that makes sense. Just the space between might get greater, or, we moved in, I'll use these terms kind of from the shadow feminine to the mature feminine. We'll use those two terms, but we're not just fully in the mature feminine and then we never go back to the shadow. It's always this weaving between the one that thinks she's a victim and the one that knows she's not a victim.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and another quality to pull in, I feel personally, with the mature feminine is the connection to whatever her relationship with God is. She's not self-sourced. I cannot emphasize that enough. Like the mature feminine in maybe sort of like a corporate sense, if we kind of want to slap a label on it, that is very, very different. Like, oh, I'm like business professional and I can, conduct myself well. Like that, obviously you hear it in my sort of theatrical portrayal of that, but that's not what we're talking about. The mature feminine is sourced in all that is. Like that is a deep fucking texture to be sourced from. And it's also kind of intense. I mean, as we've been talking about, it's like a little intense to be a vessel at that level, and totally worth it. Such a gift, to self and others. But yeah, to the point about the nervous system, I think that's really valid. I mean, I said this recently to a friend of mine. Whenever something happens between me and my man where we feel dysregulated or we feel like, oh, something's off, we're out of connection, literally our first move is to resource ourselves and then resource each other. Like, I mean, basic stuff. Have we slept? Have we had food? Have we seen the sunlight? Have we been held? Have we had enough water, preferably with electrolytes and filtered? Literally every single time. Those are the basics. Anytime we feel out of regulation with each other. And then we go into, all right, language, like what happened? How did we feel? All of that sort of like mental kind of level of communication. Anything that, if we've done this a couple of times, we just learned our lesson very early on. We tried to use words first because of course that's what the mind wants to do. It wants to kind of express itself like, you did this or I did that or la la la. And it just doesn't work. It just builds and it kind of sucks you into more of this looping processing pattern, which I think a lot of couples or just people in general, in relationship in general, even in friendships, kind of get stuck in at the level of processing, but you're not addressing the body first. You've got to get back to the body's needs first. What do you need? What are your needs? Like maybe you literally haven't had enough nutrients for the day, or maybe you're at a point in your cycle for women where you just are a bit more vulnerable, and that's perfectly all right. And actually what you do need is to just be held and cry. And that's actually what you need, but your mind is telling you all sorts of other things. So again, kind of all encapsulated in that mature feminine sort of ideal, if you will, is just know thyself. And that involves really knowing you're human. You got to know you're human first. You can't skip over that piece ever. Yeah.
Know your imperfections.
Yeah. And just know that you're kind of a complicated house plant. Like it's all good.
Complicated.
Eat yourself, water yourself, get some sun, have some sex. You'll probably be way better off.
You'll be happier in the long run. Earlier on in the conversation, you just brought up if we want our species to survive.
Ooh.
Do you
Ooh.
feel like
Interesting.
there's
Okay,
a bit of
where do you want to go?
war on our species at this time? Does anything come forward for you? It feels like there's this separation between men and women. Well, it's not right now. It's been happening for a long time.
Sure. Yeah, I feel a lot of things around this. And I feel it not from the sense of like fear mongering or, yeah, like stoking these camps that I see in the world. Like, it's like, all right, I get it. All right. Some people are going to be super staunch. You've got to get back to the fundamentals and be traditional and do that 100%. And that's the answer. And then there's going to be the opposite camp. It's be like, no. All that's wrong. We've got to do the progressive approach. We've got to change everything. Gender is not is made up. Everything is made up. Therefore, nothing matters. And like, these are just like meta level. Neither of those approaches is going to work because neither of them take into account deep knowing of the sovereign individual. They're still asking you to conform to an overarching ideal that's not sourced through the clear channel that you are connected back to God. Like, it's just not going to work. And so the issue is, there are many issues, but to your point, like, of course, there's a split between men and women, or the masculine and the feminine. And let's say, politically, of course, there are splits. Like, we see binaries everywhere. We see hierarchies everywhere we look, because that's also part of nature. Like, speaking of biology, like, has there ever been a non-hierarchical planet Earth where we have like no hierarchies of species? Like, no. Again, like, I think humans just tend to do these weird things with our minds. We tend to overcomplicate what is actually quite simple and natural. And that doesn't mean that it's pleasant or comfortable. I'm not saying that hierarchy is comfortable for everyone, especially those at the lower ends of hierarchies. And I'm not justifying anything about non-right relationship to power. Tyrants, that's a whole archetype. That's a different thing. Monopolies, that's a different thing. But like, if we get back to it, it's like hierarchies are always, if we can just be at peace with the fact that like, there will always be some binaries, there will always be, like, we are here in this very, like, we're not in a oneness experience here. Like, we're not in the afterlife. We're not, merged with the cosmic oneness. Like, that's not what we're here for. This is a world of duality. So knowing that and just becoming, okay, like a little bit more at peace with that, even if it's a bit uncomfortable, then at least it frees up a lot of our energy. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine if at scale, everybody's life force energy were freed up from that looping of like, oh, hierarchy's bad and wrong. We've got to like fix everything. It's like, whoa. Like, we're going to have these splits. And sure, will there always be some men that hate women and some women that hate men and some people that just hate? Yes. Where do you have control? Where do you have agency? It's not out there. It never will be. Literally never. Like, please. Got to come to terms with that. And again, like, I know that people listening to a podcast like this, you're already sort of self-selecting into a path that brings you closer and closer to yourself, to your own sovereignty. So I have a lot of hope. I actually do. And I feel that really deeply in my body. Like, okay, we're good. It might take several lifetimes, but we're good. We've got some momentum here now. And we have a lot of tools at our disposal that we didn't have in the past to find each other and to weave together, and as nervous systems to build a field of coherence together. We have these ways of doing that we just never did before. And that's really exciting to me, like really exciting. So to go, I guess, a little bit more onto the practical level, if you're a woman and you're listening to this podcast and you desire, sacred union with a man, like, please look at yourself, look really, really closely at where you close off to men, or where you belittle men, or where you maybe secretly hate men for whatever they've done to you in the past, or your father, or how he was, or anything, your boss, anything. Like, just look at that first, and there's nothing else. There's really nothing else to do except for look at yourself first. And have conversations, right? Open yourself up to whatever it is that, these inputs, these little pings in your system that feel like truth, or like a beacon, like a harmonic of, okay, that's a person where I can feel something in them is moving in a way that feels really true. And I want to kind of sync up with that. Like, what are they doing? How are they being who they're being? And just like be around them. It's a lot simpler than I think our brains make it out to be.
Yeah. Our brains like to complicate things.
They really do. It's very silly.
I got goosebumps when you said find each other. Like, we have the tools to find each other, and that hope and faith. I have that as well.
Do you mind if I go a little more esoteric with that piece?
I would love that.
That you might. Okay, so let's go back to the wombs then. Wombs. Okay, so this is pretty like sort of cutting edge in my human experience. So take that with a grain of salt. But I can feel, and I have felt in these recent months, that there is a collective womb space syncing up, like physically I can like feel it, and I can track the women who are a part of this womb space from afar. That's not a psychic capability. It's not coming from like through visions or, through my third eye. It's like, no. It's, I can feel them through my womb. It's a very different sensation. And it's with the women who have done the work and are continuously clearing themselves to be receptive to what is wanting to come through. And like, I don't know how it works. I don't pretend to ever, I don't think I'll ever really know. I just know that it's happening, and we're finding each other, and we're finding each other more deeply, and whatever is going to come through from there will come through in a much, so speaking back to divine feminine sort of self-sourcing and pedestalizing herself over the masculine, like this sort of undercurrent of womb connected devotional women, because there's more of an emphasis on right relationship with the masculine, there's just a different potency there. Like the creation itself, whatever we're writing, whatever we're saying, how we're supporting each other, like it's not the same texture as in circles I've been in the past, where it was all about the goddess and wild women and the dark feminine, and it's just a different, I don't know how to translate it into words just yet, but I can feel the difference. And the way that this particular field amplifies itself and amplifies the messages of whatever's coming through the wombs of the women that inhabit it, it just has a different impact, like much larger, and it really lands in women's bodies. That's what I found. It doesn't even like go through the level of the mind. It just, whatever we're saying, it's just like landing in people's bodies. And that's it. I don't know what else to say about it. It's amazing. I am so grateful to be a part of it. And yeah, like may it be for the highest good, please.
Yeah. I've noticed when I go out in public, my womb is so much more receptive to feeling the wombs of every other woman that is around me. And I haven't really known what to do with that. But like, what's going on? And there was this, because I've just recently moved to a different location in Canada. Well, I've been here for 4 months, but like there's such potency when I go out in the world. And there was just this nudge, like, you're meant to gather these women, like follow those cues from your womb. Like you're meant to come into circle with these women specifically around healing with the masculine. Because that has been such a potent part of my journey, especially like diving deep with it with Christina. And also the masculine face of God. I was so much and I'm still, goddess. I'm finding my balance between the two, but it's like for me on my own path, I haven't come into that space of healing with the masculine until I came into that space, returned to that space of the masculine face of God.
Yes.
and trusting him, because there was this underlying current that he was going to punish me.
Mm.
And so if I have that current with the masculine face of God, I'm carrying that with every man that
Yeah.
comes into my life.
So you have the flavor of punishment. I have the flavor of abandonment with the masculine face of God / men. So really fun. We get different textures to play with. I don't have yours. I literally have never felt punished by God, like ever. It doesn't live in my system. I'm like, cool, God totally loves me, gives me all these amazing things. Like, but I totally have had the sensation of like, oh no, God, especially when I was a teenager, like God is just not even here. Like there's just, this is impossible. I can't, I'm not held. I'm utterly not held. And I've definitely had that in my system for a long time.
Yeah.
It does come out with men if I'm not rooted in my sovereignty, rooted in my womb.
It comes up for me in that God will not give me what I want. He's going to punish me, so it's just interesting to see how it plays out with men or in our relationships in any way. So for you, what is that, not specifically what does a relationship with God look like, but how do you cultivate that deeper relationship with God?
Well, currently, I mean, it's always changing, isn't it? That's the fun part. Currently, I am sitting pretty much daily with Rumi's writings, Sham's writings, a lot of just Sufi mysticism for me that is really alive in my experience right now. And when I say alive, I really mean whatever I'm reading, I actually let it in. I let it hit me. I let myself feel it, and it moves me. I let myself be moved. That's the receptivity piece that you were talking about just now with the womb, and walking around the city and you can feel everyone. You're like, whoa, it's kind of a lot. You can do that with a poem, and for me, a current of, or like a harmonic that has just been very apparent. For me, when I experience divinity, it usually brings me to tears, or it makes me breathe in a different way than I usually breathe. And it's my body doing that on its own. It's not like I'm thinking about, oh, I need to breathe differently. I'm doing breath work. I'm not like doing it. You know what I mean? It's more like I read something or I experience something, and then I have this like whoosh, or this hit of whatever that force is. And my relationship with it is to welcome it and be with it, whatever it is that's moving through me. Like that's how I cultivate my relationship with God and to God. It's a very personal thing. Like I would never say like that's what you have to do. It makes me laugh. That would be the silliest thing in the world to tell somebody how to cultivate a relationship with God. But that's how I do it, at least currently. So, I have other ways too, like dance. Dance has definitely been a pathway for me to feel more communion with the divine. Yeah, I could go on.
Yeah, it feels like recognizing what moves you.
Yeah.
And it's funny how things show up for you. Like I went to a concert a couple weeks ago, and the opening first couple songs were worship to Jesus, but we didn't know that going to the concert. So I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like I'm like noted, I'm listening. And then my one friend that was there with me was saying how she was thinking about going to church. And I was like, huh? Like it was just interesting how it was coming up. And then this conversation was coming up with this friend. And then this led me to this worship music that I used to listen to. And it just like moved me so much. And it's like in those moments of like, I don't know why the word rapture is coming in, but I'll go with it. But that like, just like obliteration of the heart, like you're just moved. That's when you're experiencing God, and you can just listen to that and experience it. And it might be looking at a rose or walking down a street. It's really so individual when you're just moved by the unseen, we'll call it God, Yeah.
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden you're just swimming in something and you're like, wow, how did I get into this pool? I totally don't remember jumping in.
Yeah. How'd this happen?
Yeah, you're just like
Yeah.
in it. You're just in the current, And I think
Yeah.
those are the feelings that people live for. I think that's also, some of the reasons why we go the ways that we go in terms of dissociating. Like we just want to feel that sense of that current, and we want to get there. And so we use, whatever external substances to get there, which I think in containers can be totally fine. Maybe in not so intentional circumstances can actually pull you further away from self and essence and, divine self, let's say. But yeah, that's really beautiful. What I heard you say that I want to call out, because I feel it's actually really important, is when you said, I'm listening. Like that is something that I say almost daily, especially when something stands out to me that feels highlighted against the backdrop of the norm. And what do I mean by that? I really mean like it has some sort of frequency of the mystical or the otherworldly, or the just like the pure and the true. Like honestly, it could be quite earthly as well, but it somehow stands out against the background. And it's that kind of stuff that I'm like, oh, okay, I'm listening. And then I just like pause, and I just like either become still, or I don't know, my awareness, I can like focus my awareness in a way where I become like hyper sensitive to whatever is in that same frequency of that thing that just stood out at me. And it's almost as if that sensation is highlighting like an invitation or a beacon where your soul recognizes it, and it just naturally wants to pay more attention to it and move in the direction of it, whatever that is. So, for you in this example, it was this worship music that it just invoked rapture in you. It's not like you were choosing to be enraptured necessarily. Like that's something where, oh, I'm paying attention now. All right, what do you have for me? Interesting. Okay, I'm listening. It's that energy, which obviously is another form of receptivity. And again, if you have an open womb, that stuff becomes like commonplace, like every day. It's really freaky. It's quite a trip.
Yeah. Beautiful. Do you want to speak to the archetypes of the feminine at all?
Oh my
Have we?
gosh. While I'm here, just casually. Yeah, mythic feminine, whatever. I suppose we should speak to archetypes. Let's see. How long do we have? There's so many archetypes. Gosh, I mean, okay, what feels relevant? Okay. So funny. I just listened for what's coming up. So apparently the queen archetype wants to come up, but she's feeling super sassy. So we'll just hold our horses. So there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of writing. There's a lot of talk about like embodying your queen. Like, oh, you have to attract a king, you have to be a queen. And it's like, oh, yes, we must really embody this like regal, like we're so in our queendom, and that's how we are matched for getting a man who is a king. And or like it's like, well, you're such a queen, like you deserve a king. There's just all this language around the queen archetype these days where, oh my goodness, like look at history, people. Queens were like, I mean, sure, yeah, did they have like a really nice station in life usually compared to like peasants or commoners or lay people? Yes, but do you think for a second that like a queen wouldn't bow or kneel for her king? Like, where did that piece get lost? Like, where did it get lost that like literally the kingdom is birthed through the queen, so the queen better well take good care of her womb? Like, what? There are just these pieces around the queen archetype that are glamorized, and it's so silly because it misses the entire point. Like, we can talk about descension and ascension, right? Ascend, descend. Okay, archetypes. So we have, the earth mother, and we have, sky father. The earth is not above the sky. Like the earth is below the sky, people. Like, look at it. Obviously, if we look at the planet as a sphere and we want to get super literal about it, then this is a different conversation. But we're going to stay at the level of archetypes, right? And the human experience of it anyway. The earth and the mother is below the father and the sky. She is never above him. Like, that is the right relationship. That doesn't mean that there's power over or lesser power, lesser than. It doesn't mean that at all. People get so bent out of shape, bent out of shape around the term above and below. Why do we associate the word below with negative? Like, why is that somehow also less than? It's not. It's simply a geographical position. That's it. Like, why is being higher like better? It's not actually. Archetypally, it's not. It has access to different things. So the sky, the sort of heavens, the celestial, the consciousness that's up in that realm is no better than the underbelly, the underworld, the intestines, the roots, the worms, like the grime. Like, there's no better or worse. They are absolutely complementary. And when speaking about like queen archetypes or any archetype that again gets sort of glamorized and pedestalized, it just makes no sense to me, because again, you're off the path. You're not actually with the nature of things. Like, you've forgotten the map. You have to come back to the map. Otherwise you're going to be astray, and it will cause you a lot more suffering. It will cause others a lot more suffering. So you can avoid all of that, but you've got to set your ego aside. And you also have to stop listening to Instagram influencers. So, unless it's a fair few that nowadays we know are a little bit more finely calibrated to the harmonic of truth. So
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I've never thought about it, but for some reason there is an inversion, we'll call it, that if you're below, you're beneath, and it's a negative thing.
Like, oh my gosh, where do you think the tree grows from? Literally. Yeah. Again, this is kind of a silly example, like a little bit more masculine, but really, really big skyscraper, you got to have a really strong foundation. Where does the foundation live? It's definitely below. It's definitely beneath. It has to be. Like, how is a king and a kingdom going to unfold if the roots and the queen and the underworld of that, like the connection to the mystery, the connection to the depths, the connection to the earth, like it's going to falter. It will not work. You have to have both, because that's the whole point. They're complementary. And it's archetypal, but it's also very literal. You can look around it and see it in the world. You can see women who are trying to one up their husbands. You can, see women who are attempting to get into realms of politics and be better than men and put men down. And there's no sense of like, wait a second, like, please, like, not saying this is for everyone, but for a lot of women, like, we actually have more potency when we are rooted, when we are not necessarily in a supporting quote unquote role of like, well, it's not at all about me, it's all about you. It's like, no, it's like co-creative, it's generative, but we are the ones that are sourcing the nutrients from and through our roots, through the earth grids, through the oracular nature of the womb. That's all like down here. I don't know if you can like see on the video, but I'm gesturing down here. Like, that's our realm. Like, be in it. Why are we trying to be in a realm that's not our realm? Like, please rule your queendom. Just, you got to be clear on where your queendom is actually located. Otherwise you get boss babes and like manifest this and manifest that, and it's all coming up from here, like from our minds. It's not sourced from like the womb heart connection from below. We've got to like bring it up through ourselves.
Yeah.
That was a whole rant. I could totally.
That was a rant. That was a powerful rant though. Well, and it's like, I've been that one. Like, I was in a mastermind called the Queendom. We were, on a a group to create like 6 figures in our business and boss babes and just nailing it,
Yeah, crushing it, killing it.
crushing it, killing it.
Of course you were. That's all right.
But yeah, but it didn't. And, even with manifestation, I'll speak to this, like holding visions and holding mantras or affirmations or whatever. And I was like, I got to a point where I was like, this is exhausting. And why it was exhausting was because I was in my head. I was holding visions and repeating affirmations over and over again. I was so in my head. And I was like the peace that I felt when I just descended into my body and let that all go was like the ultimate surrender, because it was exhausting trying to hold on to the visions, whatever it might be, and you're missing the moment in my experience. And so I see that distortion around the queen. She's ruling the kingdom, she's competing with a man, essentially. That's what it,
Totally.
yeah.
Totally. And it's not just that she's competing with a man, but she's competing with a man along masculine standards. If you're competing with a man along feminine standards, you're going to win. Come on, compete with him in oracular wisdom. Like, compete with him in ability to hold pain and sensation and emotion in his body. Like, sure, you're going to win. Guess why? That's your territory. Like, go ahead, try and burn out your system. And I'm gonna get on a rant. Like, let me keep going.
Feel some funniness here.
I get real sassy. I get very sassy sometimes. Very fiery. That's my Celtic nature, I suppose.
It's a powerful one. And I think it's a really valid conversation where we're burning ourselves out when we're trying to compete in a realm that's not ours.
Yeah. And I mean, I literally work in software sales. Like, it's not a thing where it doesn't mean that you can't perform in a linear, structured environment. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means, like, if I'm not aware of the fact that I'm a cyclical being, I will push myself and hold myself to standards that are not fit for me. And that means, like, I am also lucky. I'm excuse me, I'm also fortunate to have chosen a field where I have the luxury of working remotely. I have the luxury of structuring my weeks as I see fit, because I'm the one generating sales, for instance, in my day job, let's say. And I can regulate my system as I see fit in the way that fits, with the goals that I very tactically have. But oh my goodness, if I tried to run my days like my man runs his, I would be so miserable, and I would have nothing to offer him or myself, first and foremost, or God, like, let alone him, But I would have nothing. I would be so dry. I would be so drained and so tired and so brittle. And I just see this all the time, and it feels really painful. I so feel. And honestly, like, to go back to your point around, walking around the city and you can feel women's wombs, like, you can also feel the pain of a woman who is not in touch with her womb and who is living from her neck up. Like, you can feel them, and you can see them. You can actually identify them visually, usually. And so can men, actually. They know that too. They definitely know. They might not be able to say why. They know, but they can feel the difference. And again, like, all things in context, right? Like, there's so much nuance here. Like, I will never, ever, ever paint a blanket brush, but I will say that it is wise to notice patterns, because it saves us time. And it allows us to free up our life force in ways that is more supportive, in ways that are more supportive of more life force, not less. It's like, well, why else are we here? We're literally here to be alive. So,
Yeah. Might as well be alive and engage with life, and felt like that surrender to it, which we spoke to.
Yeah.
Really, like that ultimate surrender where you're not controlling or grasping.
No, it's more of a listening and responding. It's a sensing and responding. You never, ever, ever again have a 5-year plan. they're gone. They dissolve. You don't even know what the next day will bring. And that is perfectly okay, because you have the capacity to respond to whatever the moment is gifting you, whatever provision is or isn't being gifted to you, whatever sensations are arising in your in your body, in your experience. Like you have the capacity to meet life from a non-linear place and have that be not just okay, but incredibly potent and such a gift. It's a very different place to live life from, is a sort of non-linear, mystery-based place. Like why you have this entire podcast, like the Feminine Mysteries. Being in touch with the mystery, like that's it. It's I mean, to use sort of like a trope, it's a vibe. A little bit meme worthy, but but it is. Yeah.
I love that, listening and responding.
Yeah. It's just a different feeling. I mean, you can sit in circle with women and you can tell the ones who are kind of on the edge of like, ooh, can I actually trust this new way of living life? Like, oh, I don't know. I still gotta, reference my planner or my journal. I've got to pull my tarot cards every day, or, every day I have my morning ritual. It's like, okay, you can do that too. Like, it's wonderful for a time. And there comes a point where you can just move beyond that and drop all of that and literally just respond to the moment. And that doesn't mean that you can't plan, of course. Like, please, if something hits you and you're like, whoa, like this feels true, I got to do this. Please, use your life force in the way that's true. But yeah, it just becomes a little less important. I'll like what you were talking about earlier with that mastermind, like again, strategies and whatever, scalable systems to get you to point B. It's like, yeah, no, I'm over that. I'm not doing that anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. I felt that for sure.
Yeah.
Feel exhausting. Yeah. What's been your biggest lesson along the way?
Oh, goodness. That's such a big question. I'm sure everybody says that. Like, you are so not the driver. That's the lesson. You're so not the driver. It's really cute when you think you are. It's adorable, actually. And it's hella frustrating too, sometimes. But yeah, I mean, it's that control piece. I think my biggest lesson has been around control. And with control goes impatience as well. So lots of lessons around patience versus impatience, agenda versus allowing. It's really kind of all under that umbrella of like, I'm not the driver. I'm really not. And yeah, I mean, some excruciating points of that journey where I was just so resisting life, completely resisting things that were happening, being given to me, not being given to me. Or yeah, just as you were saying with your relationship with God, of like, oh, like God is punishing me by not giving me this thing or this man or this whatever salary. Take your pick. But that's not the point. I'm like really, really dead clear, like crystal clear. That's not the point. Like, the point is to clear yourself out of the way, allow the life force to pour through, and whatever happens from that place is going to work. It's just going to work. And it's not like you know what the outcome is, but that's the whole point. Like, it's driving you, and it has its own intelligence. It has its own harmonic, and that is like completely trustworthy. It's just so different. That's it. That's all I got.
It's a potent lesson. It's a powerful one. We're not in the driver's seat.
Thanks. And then, I mean, here's the thing, like, I guess where people are going to get, and this is where I got tripped up. It's like, well, what about my agency? Like, what about my free will? It's like, of course you have free will. We're still in this like very three-dimensional reality. We can choose whatever we want. Of course, if I wanted to, I could structure or like create, my 10-year plan. I could back plan it. I could project manage it. I can do it and do, but it would all be coming from my mind. And like, how that's incredibly boring, actually.
Well, and life might throw you a curveball too, where that doesn't actually happen. you
For
know?
sure. For sure. It's like, hey, you forgot. I'm
Yeah.
like,
You forgot.
you forgot again. Stop that. Like,
Yeah. I was interviewed for on the show once, and my lesson at that time, and it's still a powerful one, is I know nothing, because every time I think I know, God's like, no, you don't, like I get sideswiped with some heartbreak or, whatever it is. And I know it's all for my greater good, but it's like, we think we know, but we don't know. We're not in the driver's seat,
yeah. And
Yeah.
that's actually not so scary once
No.
the trust is reestablished with the divine, and again, like right relationship with self, and just, yeah, there's just a different quality of like, all right, well, I'm here again as a human, so might as well go on this little ride here, and let me see if I can just try to remember as much as possible what's actually important. And that's kind of it.
Yeah.
Like, that's
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you experience the mysteries?
Whew. You just like, I love your questions because you're just like, all right, on to the next one. It's big, but you like don't give a preface. You just go to the question. I'm like, dang, that was like, hey, so great, so potent. How do I experience the mysteries? Oh gosh, usually through my body. Yeah, usually through my body. Definitely through pleasure, through orgasm, through dance, through sensing, like through kind of like the spidey senses. Yeah. Yeah, it's really energetic. I experience the mysteries very like energetically, I would say.
Mm.
Yeah, and sometimes in vision as well. Sometimes there will just be something that hits me like up here. But that's not so often. It's more so through my body. And also through other people. Like really, I've had these times, I'm sure you can relate, in life where it's just been that like the mystery has come through the person in front of me as they are the channel, and I'm just like, oh damn, that message was for me. Okay. Like,
Yeah.
thank you, let me bow to that which is within you that just gave me that thing. Like, whoa. So yeah, definitely experiencing the mysteries through a lot of powerful women. Powerful not in like the traditional senses. Blown away by many women and men who are just, yeah, being just deeply in tune with whatever is sourcing them. And I always have to bow to that. Like, there's just such a reverence there that comes naturally through me. I just want to bow to it really humbly, and total reverence, and like deep gratitude. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. The whole reason that I mean, there's many reasons why I moved to where I'm living now, but it was divinely orchestrated synchronicities. And it was a man who gave me the gift without even knowing like the sign that I was looking for. And it was so powerful. So I just love that, like how we experience the mysteries through other people. And when I told him what I received from him, he started crying because he was just so like blown away. But it was like messengers. There's so many messengers.
But only if you're listening.
If only if you're listening. Yes, only if you're listening. How do you root into the self?
How do I root into the self? Well, can we define self real quick? Because
Well,
like
yeah.
so many layers of the self, and I really don't want to like root into many of those layers.
Our true essence. Let's use like our feminine core, like that, like root into our body.
Oh,
Pleasurable.
well, first of all, I gotta stretch because we've been sitting here. So that's one way. It's like actually moving my body. What a concept. Yeah, I mean, for me, like really simple. If I want to go super practical with it, it's just like hips. I move my hips. Like, whether it's like Brazilian Zouk, whether I'm just dancing alone. Like I do a lot of Latin dances. That's kind of my dance background. I just like put on Afro beats. I'm like in my hips, I'm in my pelvic bowl. Like that's it. Like that is a huge pathway for me. It's a really easy access point. It feels really good. It feels really like loosening and enlivening. And, sometimes it's just like literally stretching, like not, fancy schmancy yoga or whatever, like just, stretching my body and rooting into, again, the point is like, I've got to just get back to my body, get back to my root, get back to my feminine core. If there's gunk and residue on my heart, like, all right, it's time to have a good cry. Like now we're going to go and cry for a while. I'm just going to be sad and just like let the stuff clear. There's that as well. So yeah, I mean, through whatever it is that needs to move, whether it's the tears, whether it's breath, whether it's like my hips, whether, I don't know, I hike a lot. Like that's another way. It's just like move energy through my body like that. That helps me come back to, clearer spaces, clarity within myself. I think saying it out loud, it feels almost a little bit just like trite, like, oh, everybody knows this. It's not special, but I guess we all need reminders sometimes.
We do. And it's like those really simple things that, in my experience, a lot of humans like to complicate things, myself included, where it's like, oh, to root into myself, I got to do da 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 da, like this big checklist. And it's like, actually, I mean, the quickest way is to take a really deep breath or to just stretch like you just did, like it can be so simple. It doesn't have to be complex. And so I think we do need those reminders.
Yeah. Yep. And, drink some water. Always drinking water. I actually am super thirsty. So that's the first thing I'm going to do when we end.
Is there anything that is on your heart that you want to add before or bring into the conversation before we close, love?
Let me just feel for a moment here. Oh, there's just a tenderness. That's fun. Yeah, such a tenderness. I wonder what that's about. Yeah, I feel so deeply the women that are still kind of in the scary, sad parts of the dark of this journey. Because of course, it's a journey in the dark. That's the whole point. It's the mystery. It's the void. You're going to be in the dark, but there's like a different, I just feel a really deep tenderness there that there will come a time. I just need to like say this, there will come a time where that's not scary anymore, where you have just a very clear sense of what deep knowing feels like in your body. You will have a clear sense of what truth feels like in your body. You will have a very clear sense of like your nervous system will tell you when a man is right for you. Your nervous system will tell you what you need, and your womb will tell you where to move, where to go. So it's like you're already, if you're here, you're already on that journey. So just like trust that a little bit more, be a little bit gentler, ask for help, find women who are, again, like sort of being or whatever it is, like embodying that sense. It's like really the sense that you'll have. You're like, okay, I've got to like glom on to whatever she's got going on, or like listen to more of these podcasts, so like really feel it, like allow it in. But there's just a tenderness that I have because I have a tenderness for myself. Like we're never done. Like it's not, in a sense, it's like an oracular path or a priestess path or a left-hand path or, whatever you want to call it. Like you don't get to get off of it. So
nope.
To make it easier, it is nice to find others and feel their wombs and sync up your womb spaces and
beautiful.
Yeah,
beautiful. Do you have any offerings that you want to share coming up?
Yeah, I write a lot. I shouldn't say like a lot, but I do write. People can always find my writing on Instagram, mythic.feminine, mythic.feminine. I do have one guided visualization out there for people. I think it's like $22. It's very accessible. It's actually a guide to embodying your feminine longing, audio there. And obviously it has my voice. So hopefully you like my voice if you're downloading that. Otherwise don't. And then very, very selectively, I'll work one-on-one with clients, but that's just done via application. And that's also linked on Instagram. So lots of little ways, but I mean, honestly, it's just like, if you're in this space, you'll find the rest of us. Your womb's going to find the rest of us. Don't worry too much about the details, and you'll find the people that you're meant to work with. So just reach out. That's
like
it.
listening and following that knowing.
Exactly.
For sure.
And it gets easier the more you practice it too. So
Beautiful. Thank you so much for this conversation. And it'll be in the show notes where everybody can reach out to you and experience your medicine.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much for joining me for an episode of the Phoenix Rising podcast. Please like, share, download, subscribe if you enjoyed this episode. And I will see you next week for another episode on the Phoenix Rising podcast. Sending so much love.